Alright everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra and compare it against the iPhone 14 Pro Max and basically see which one is the better phone for you. Now these two phones, as most of us probably know, are very different. There's some overlap for sure, but there are some key differences as well. And this has probably been one of the more interesting ways in which people stay within their ecosystem. If you're on an iPhone, you're probably going to stick with iOS. If you're on an Android, you're going to stick with like a Samsung or Google Pixel or one of those types of devices. So I will try to break down the discrepancies here and hopefully find one that works for you. If you want to pick either one of these phones up throughout the duration of this video, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now starting off with the outside, the iPhone 14 Pro Max came out late last year, 2022, and essentially on the front, it has a beautiful 6.7-inch LTPO Super Retina XDR OLED display. It's a 120Hz panel, fairly high resolution too, which is really good. And overall, I mean, it's a really nice panel. It's probably one of the best panels Apple's ever made. Now we do have the dynamic island, which is very strange. I've never seen a specific feature Apple's brought over that has like fell off so hard in terms of popularity. I don't really see too many people talking about it. It used to be kind of like a lot of people were tweeting about how cool it was. And now we don't really hear too many things about it anymore. It seems like it's pretty much gotten normal. And I feel like with this type of display, it's good. But when you take a look at the Galaxy S23 Ultra's display, Samsung notoriously makes some of the best panels. I don't know if Samsung made any of the iPhone 14 panels, but with this one on the S23 Ultra, we have a 6.8-inch dynamic AMOLED display. It's a 1440p panel. It's a 120Hz panel as well, just like with the 14 Pro Max, and it's probably the better panel here. So for one, it's a hole punch display, so it's not like this gigantic hole punch display on the 14 Pro Max. It's much smaller and much sleeker, which looks great. It's also a curved glass panel. Now some people like it, some people actually don't like it at all. Me personally, I actually do like it a little bit more than the standard flat panel because it gives the aura that it's a little bit less bezel, has less bezel on the sides, and it does actually look better overall in my opinion. Now a big difference is that on the 14 Pro Max you have this like curved edge. With the S23 Ultra, it's a flat edge on the top and bottom. I prefer the flat edges too a little bit more because it just makes it feel a little bit better in the hand, but the 14 Pro Max actually is more comfortable to feel in the hand. So it's kind of a little bit of a difference there. USB-C on the S23 Ultra, 14 Pro Max has a lightning port, and on the back we have frosted glass backs on both. Now one key other difference for the S23 Ultra is that it does have the S Pen, which is really cool. The 14 Pro Max does not have any stylus support like that, so it's not a big deal, but it's kind of a really nice thing that you're getting on the S23 Ultra. Now in the top left of the back of these phones, we have our camera modules. We technically have more camera sensors on the S23 Ultra, but we'll kind of talk about the differences here in a second. Like I said, frosted glass backs, we have wireless charging on both. We do have reverse wireless charging on the Galaxy S23 Ultra, which is actually a very nice thing to have. On top of that, we have standard things like IP certification, we have great build quality, we have everything like that between both phones. But the S23 Ultra is a little bit more expensive in the brand new market, but the 14 Pro Max has been out for a little bit of time now, so you can probably pick them up in the used market for probably much cheaper than they were brand new. But the other thing to keep in mind, iPhones tend to keep their values up a little bit more than the Androids, at least with the S23 Ultra in this case. So probably within the next 3 or 4 months, I wouldn't be surprised if the S23 Ultra is already like $600 off the price that it's being sold for right now. So in terms of the outsides, that kind of covers it up there. Now in the camera department, like I said, very different camera setups between both, but they have the same functionality. So with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, we have a 48 megapixel wide-angle lens, 12 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera. With the Galaxy S23 Ultra, has a 200 megapixel wide-angle lens, 10 megapixel periscope telephoto lens, a 10 megapixel telephoto lens, and then a 12 megapixel ultra-wide camera. So we have a ton of functionality here for sure, which is amazing. We're getting 4K at 60 on the back of both these phones, and we're getting 4K at 60 on the front of both these phones as well. But the Galaxy S23 Ultra does have 8K capability, which is amazing. Most people probably will never use it, but it is really nice having some phone that has that type of capability because it does future-proof yourself a little bit more. If the next iPhone comes out with 8K, it kind of feels like some of the older ones will kind of be outdated. In this case, since the Galaxy S20s, all these ones have had it, so it's kind of like a nice thing to have right there. Now in terms of the raw functionality, one thing I've kind of seen is that with the iPhone 14 Pro Max, great camera, there's really not too much to hate on it there. The only slight issue I have with the iPhone 14 Pro Max is that the camera UI has pretty much been the same thing since like day one. So you're really not going to be getting like crazy big improvements, I would say, in terms of the raw features that are being added to that specific camera. On the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra though, there are so many features brought into that type of camera from years and years ago that still hold up very, very well. And in my opinion, when I look at the S23 Ultra, it's a very solid camera. It's probably the better camera here when it comes down to it. I think the iPhone's cameras are great and they work really well with applications like Snapchat and TikTok and whatnot, but with Samsung in this case, I feel like that's the one area they drop down in, but their stock camera application has so many more features that it's just kind of unfair to compare them even between these two massively expensive phones. So from that perspective, I kind of do think the Galaxy S23 Ultra wins. But when we switch over to the software and the longevity portion of both these phones, you have to keep in mind that even though these phones are kind of neck and neck and they're kind of competitors, Samsung still, I don't think, will keep their phones as long in terms of the software support standpoint compared to their iPhone counterparts of that year. So what I mean by that basically is if we take a look back at the 2020 phones that came out, the Galaxy S20 and the iPhone 12, well, most probably the iPhone 12 is still going to be supported for the next several years. The Galaxy S20 though, it's probably done with One UI 5. Even if you compare it against the iPhone 11, the iPhone 11 is going to be getting software support for at least another 3 years, probably 2 to 3 years, where the Galaxy S20 is kind of done. I mean, it might get some security updates. Even if it gets One UI 6, it's still not going to last as long as the iPhone 11 right before it. So I say that to say, unless Samsung improves their software again, the iPhone is probably going to win. But I'll stay safe for a Samsung. It's still going to be supported for several more years, so you don't really have too much to complain about in that standpoint either. So that kind of covers it up there. Now between the performance between both, the iPhone 14 Pro Max has that Apple A16 Bionic chip inside of it with 6GB of RAM inside, where the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra has that Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 chipset inside of it, and it starts at 8GB of RAM, but it does go up to 12GB of RAM, which is a lot of RAM to have on a device. Now, I will tell you, for basically every application you're going to do and basically mess with, it's going to be pretty much exactly the same. Not only have I just compared these two devices, but I've also compared, my Galaxy S23 against my iPhone 14 Pro, between my iPhone 14, same thing with the S23 Plus, and they're all kind of like the same performance. Like at this level, you're not going to be noticing which one is slightly faster than the other one. The only thing I will tell you though, is that the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1 of last year did have several complaints, and I do think Qualcomm kind of took note of those and they kind of fixed and addressed those specific situations, which is great. I do think the iPhone chipset in this case will always be more optimized, so if you're trying to play like games at a longer period of time and a longer duration, you're probably going to be getting, a less battery drain and less of a hot phone on something like an iPhone, depending on how long you play with it, than on the S23 Ultra. But for basic applications, it's going to be exactly the same. Not one is going to be faster than the other one. But, when you do play those heavy intensive games, I do feel like you can get more power out of something like a Galaxy S23 Ultra. Meaning that if you're playing a really intensive game, potentially you're going to be getting a little bit better performance from an S23 Ultra in terms of the speed and less glitches than an iPhone 14 Pro Max. But the 14 Pro Max is going to be more optimized, so it's not going to be as hot. So from a performance standpoint, I think that kind of covers it up, to be honest. And when it kind of comes down to these both devices, like I said, you can't go wrong with either one. These both are the best of the best phones you can buy pretty much right now. There's obviously some counterparts and some other devices like the Folds and whatnot, but I think Samsung knocked it out of the park with the S23 Ultra, and I think the 14 Pro Max is a very good iPhone as well. I don't know if one is way better than the other one, but if I wasn't coming from an iPhone or, if I wasn't coming from an iOS and iPhone background, I might actually end up picking up the S23 Ultra. But because it's a little bit more expensive, the 14 Pro Max may be a little bit of a better deal. But the S23 Ultra, you're getting that better display. You're getting that S Pen, which is so cool. You have the ability of installing third-party applications on your S23 Ultra, and there's so many games and emulators and applications available just from that makes it a more optimized device for myself than an iPhone. But I like iPhones because they're very smooth. The ecosystem behind those devices, I feel like there's a lot of applications that are native between, iPhones that work really well for me. So that's kind of how both these devices compare. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.